Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas. And a brand new study. We're going to take a look at the Apocrypha and a very interesting study. We're going to take a look at the book of Tobit. But the Apocrypha are not considered scripture by the Protestant faith, especially Southern Baptists do not consider the Apocrypha as scripture. However, I believe we can look at the Apocrypha as inspired literature. Not scripture, but inspired literature. So I think there is inspiration present here, but as literature. And remember, Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, quoted from the Apocrypha. The Apostle John, in our study of Revelation, he quoted from the Apocrypha. But when you read it, it's obvious that it is not scripture, but I believe it is inspired literature, and it can be instructive and informative. And we're going to look at the very first book of the Apocrypha, and that's the book of Tobit, and it is a very obvious allegory. And we're going to take a look at this allegory and its spiritual depth of meaning. And I think you'll agree with me that it has something to offer, and that it can be regarded as spiritual literature. Not scripture, but spiritual literature. Inspired literature. And we're not going to go verse by verse. We're not doing a study of scripture here. We're looking at a literary work. And so it's not going to be a verse-by-verse study. It's just basically going to look at the entire text as a narrative. It's going to be a narrative study. So look at the chart, and you'll notice I've broken it down into an introduction, and then chapters 1 through 9 that give us the first moment, and then from chapter 10 to the end of the book for the second moment. And I think that'll give us our best understanding. But before we get started, just to give us a little bit of a informative insight at the beginning, let's go to block 3, block 3, note 4. And I'm going to give you the representations or the signs of this allegory before we get started, and then you can have that in the back of your mind. Tobit represents fallen mankind in need of spiritual healing. Tobias, his son, represents the promised redeemed Israel. Raphael represents Christ. Raphael is the angel in the narrative. He represents Christ who secures our inheritance. Remember, in Revelation, the book of Revelation, in our study, Christ at times was referred to as an angel, as the angel of primacy. So that's not an unusual semeion sign for the Messiah. But that'll give you your background significations. Tobit is fallen mankind. Tobias is promised redeemed Israel. Raphael is Christ, the Messiah. Or from a Jewish perspective, just the coming Messiah. Because the Apocrypha are Jewish apocalyptic writings. And so you could say that Raphael represents the coming Messiah who will secure our eternal inheritance. The coming Messiah who will secure our eternal inheritance. Because it's all about a journey to secure inheritance. Like I said, a very obvious allegory, but to me, an inspired literary work. Let's go to block 1 and look at the introduction. Under Scripture, Tobit is considered Scripture by the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, Scripture for edification and liturgy. not for Protestants. Protestants do not consider the Apocrypha as scripture. The reference text from which it is drawn, it was present in Codex Sinaiticus, and a copy of Tobit was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The date of writing is the 2nd century before Christ, but the period being referenced is 722 AD, when northern Israel, Galilee, is conquered by the Assyrians, and the Israelites are exiled to Nineveh. The Jews are always captured and exiled, it seems, but it's about another exilic revelation. It is about the captivity of Galilee, and the Israelites are exiled to Nineveh. The situation: Tobit is assigned to serve in the court of the Assyrian king, Shalmaneser. And if that sounds like Daniel to you, well, it should. Daniel is apocalyptic, and Tobit is apocalyptic. Now the narrative runs like this. The angel Raphael is to accompany Tobias, Tobit's son, to Media in order to exorcise a demon from a relative of Tobit's named Sarah, and then return back to Nineveh to cure Tobit of his blindness. The purpose of the book is to illustrate God's authority and God's righteousness, and to exhort the Israelites to retain their identity in God, to retain their identity in Yahweh. There's your introductory background. Now let's take a look at Block 2 and take a look at chapters 1 through 9. We begin with understanding that Tobit, as humanity, has fallen, a fallen nature, and is spiritually blind. Tobit becomes blind due to an accident, and he suffers this blindness for 4 years. He is in need of healing. He is in need of redemption. Humanity is in need of healing. Humanity is in need of redemption. He becomes very bitter in his blindness, and he is rebuked by his wife for this bitterness. He even prays for death because of his suffering. He has got to that point of, there's no escape. I have been forsaken to this blindness. I am God forsaken. He prays for death. So he needs a redemption that will reach into complete God forsakenness. Now, note 2, Tobias, Tobit's son, is supposed to take Sarah in marriage. Sarah is in Media. And Tobit has an inheritance for his son of 10 talents of silver in Media, which his son must retrieve. But the father tells his son he must find a companion to travel with him, because any travel during that time was dangerous. It's a journey that is dangerous for anyone traveling alone. Tobias seeks a companion traveler. He's approached by an angel, the angel Raphael, but Raphael conceals the fact that he is an angel, and he approaches Tobias as a man. We have divinity in incarnate man, obviously the Messiah figure. Now the father, Tobit, interviews Raphael, thinking that he is a man. During this interview, Raphael, the angel, tells Tobit that his time for healing is at hand. His time for healing is drawing near. Does that sound like a familiar apocalyptic message? It is very much the hope of the Jews that the Messiah is near. The Messiah is coming. Now, note 3, Tobias and Raphael set out for their journey. They set out for their journey. Upon reaching Media, this is where Tobias is to marry Sarah, but she is supposed to be plagued by a demon who kills any husband that she tries to marry. And usually on the wedding night, she's tried marriage 7 times, and all 7 husbands have been killed by this demon. Raphael assures Tobias that the marriage was ordained before the world was created. He says that on their wedding night they must stand and pray and dedicate their marriage to God. On the wedding night, the demon flees, as Raphael proclaimed, and Raphael captures it and binds the demon hand and foot. Sound familiar? The binding of Satan, hand and foot. Very similar to the apocalyptic book of Revelation. Sarah's father gives Tobias half of everything that he owns to take with him back to his father in Nineveh. Retrieval of the inheritance. Tobias asks Raphael to go to the house of Gabael and get the 10 talents of silver being held for him that his father had deposited there. It is Christ, it is Raphael who goes and gathers the inheritance for Tobias. It is the promised Messiah who gathers the inheritance. Like I said, this is very much apocalyptic literature, very similar to Daniel that was quoted by the Apostle John. Very similar. Okay, let's go to block 3, the second moment, the apocalyptic ending, chapter 10 to the end of the book. Understanding the allegory. Tobias and Raphael return to Tobit, and Tobit's blindness at this time is cured. Tobit praises God because he can now see his son of promise. He now sees the son of promised fulfillment. Raphael reveals that he is an angel to Tobit. Raphael reveals to Tobit that he is an angel sent by God. He says he is one of the 7 angels that stand with readiness before God. He then ascends to heaven. Tobit praises God and eventually will die at the ripe old age of 112. The blessing of apocalyptic fulfillment. Tobias has 7 sons of Sarah. Before Tobit dies, he blesses all of them and prophesies this prophecy. Jerusalem will fall and the temple will be burned to the ground. But the apocalyptic consummation will come and all nations will, at the eschaton, worship God in truth. He tells Tobias to migrate to Media and leave Nineveh because it is a wicked city. Tobit represents the fallen mankind in need of spiritual healing. Tobias represents the promised, redeemed Israel. Raphael represents the coming Messiah who secures our inheritance. Like I said, very much an obvious allegory. I view this as divinely inspired literature, not divinely inspired Scripture, but I do view it as divinely inspired literature. That's a difference, but I do think it is inspired. And I think it's inspired because of the content here that we have discussed. This journey to secure eternal inheritance. The healing of what? Blindness. The healing of blindness. Spiritual blindness. It's about the healing of spiritual blindness. Those themes to me point to an apocalyptic book, which the Apocrypha are apocalyptic books, and very much in the same tone as Daniel and the same tone as the book of Revelation. The Apostle John quoted from the Apocrypha. Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, in fact all 7 bishops of Asia Minor, viewed the Apocrypha as Scripture because they were all bishops appointed by the Apostle John. So all 7 churches viewed the Apocrypha as scripture in Asia Minor. So I don't view it as scripture, but I do view it as inspired literature. It does not read like scripture to me. It is very much narrative, and a narrative different than the book of Exodus. It is narrative, but you can see the difference between the Exodus narrative and the Tobit narrative. So there's a difference there, but I think that this overview gives us a great look at the depth of meaning in the book of Tobit. That's going to wrap up our first little look at a book of the Apocrypha, and we will pick up next time with our next study.